So today I've got beef. No, not that kind. I've got beef with Red Hat, more specifically AWX. So AWX is the upstream version of Red Hat automation platform. And my biggest concern is how difficult it is these days to install it. For those that remember back in version 15, it was just a couple of containers, really simple to install. The big problem we have these days is it needs Kubernetes. Why? It's just an automation platform. It's just a scheduler. It doesn't need an entire cluster to be able to run the service. Yes, you can run it in Minikube, but that's not for production use.
What?
Are there better tools out there that serve the same purpose and give us more benefit? And what exactly would we lose if we stopped using AWX? I feel sad for doing this video, but I feel it's needed. Let's have a look at how to use Ansible inside Jenkins. So a lot of people are familiar with Jenkins. They use it as a pipeline. They use it to be able to do continuous deployments. Today is a very simplistic look at Jenkins. I'm not going to go into pipelines. I'm not going to go into, the Jenkins file and things like that. I'm just going to use the user interface to be able to schedule some things. Now, I actually use Jenkins on a group of web servers that I have. So I've got a cluster of 4 web servers all running Nginx. And the thing that I do is instead of using cron to do cleanup tasks and things like that on the particular web servers, I actually use Jenkins to do it. And the reason that I do that is because I can then see the output. You can't, without messing around in cron and changing your scripts to pipe the output somewhere, you can't see the output of cron. It also allows me to add other web servers to the cluster and easily make the changes in Jenkins instead of having to set everything up on the web servers, and the web servers then become just there to serve web traffic and do nothing else. But today we're going to talk about Ansible. So first things first, we're going to go across and we're going to do a new item, and we're going to call this Ansible test. I'm just going to do a freestyle project. There's many different things that we can talk about at a later date, but let's just pick a freestyle project and press OK. And here is our project. Now, what's going to happen as I'm going through this and having a look at it with you is we may actually need to go and install some more Jenkins modules. But let's just have a look at this. So we could do none of that. We could actually just go ahead and in the build steps do execute shell, type in your command, hit save, and this Jenkins server will do that for you. So that's the first thing that I'm going to show you guys. But before I do that, I'm just going to go and set up Git. So we've got the source control. Now we could again do that in the build step. We could do a Git checkout. We could log into the server, store our credentials, etc., and everything would be fine. Let's go ahead and click on Git here. So we've got a repository. We need to add some credentials, etc., etc. So let me go and grab the GitHub credentials that we need. Here is our repository, and you can see there that it's going to fail to connect because it needs our credentials. So in credentials, there aren't any in there at the moment. I'm going to click add, and we want a Jenkins credential. I'm going to put a username in here and a password. So my username is just TobyLock, and then my password is stored there. And I'm actually using my PAT token from GitHub as my password, which is a valid way of being able to communicate with GitHub. I'm not going to add anything else in there, apart from actually I will just set a description of GitHub PAT token and hit add. Now if I set that now and hit apply and hit save, Let's go back into that and just have a look. And what we should notice is it still can't do it. So what I'm going to go and do is have a look on the server itself, and I have a feeling that Git might not be installed. And there we have it. So Git isn't installed. I'm going to go ahead and install Git. So on most people's Jenkins servers, obviously Git's going to already be installed. So on save, let's go back to configure. And now look, we don't have any errors. So Git is now there. It can do a git ls on that repository and see things. We then have different branches. So if we weren't using master, we were using main, or we were using a particular branch, we can set that here. And then we've got other things that we can do. So this is Jenkins out the box. I've allowed it to do the recommended plugins, but there's no special plugins here. And then we have the build steps. So what I'm now going to do is a very, very simplistic way of working with Ansible. And that is, I'm going to just run Ansible. So the first thing I need to do here is the Jenkins node. I'm actually going to go and install pip3 Python. It's Python 3 pip. Which will go and get me Python 3.6. And the reason I'm doing that is I prefer to install a later version of Ansible. Pip3 install Ansible is going to get us a 4.10 version of Ansible. And there we have it. So we should now be able to run Ansible playbook. And we can see here that we've got Ansible running. Great. So now what we need to do is go back to our host, and in here, we've already checked out the repository. The repository is here. And in here, we have a webserver.yaml, and we have an inventory.txt. So this is where the difference is between Jenkins using Ansible and something like AWX, that you can set an inventory. Now, we could do that in Jenkins, but we can also just use an inventory file. So let's type it out. So it'll be Ansible playbook -i inventory.txt webserver.yaml. And that would be it. Now, if we wanted to make this inventory file, so if we have a look at what that inventory file looks like, it's very, very simple. It looks just like this. We could, on the command line, write it out. We could use a dynamic inventory and run a script that creates it. There's many things we can do. This is literally executing on the host. In Jenkins, I'm doing this on the master host. Obviously, in a production environment, most people would have slave hosts that they connect to. So let me just check that that IP address has come up correctly on the host that we are going to connect to. Yep, the IP address is correct. So we should just be able to hit save and then build now. And the thing I really like about Jenkins is you can then hit this and just go and watch the console output. And here we go. So here's our first problem. Permission denied. And the reason permission is denied is it's got no way of authenticating to that server. Now, we could go through and create a Jenkins file that grabs the secrets out of Jenkins and uses them to connect. Or on the host, we can just do an SSH. Well, we need to generate an ID first. So we need to become the Jenkins user. We can do SSH keygen to generate us a SSH key. We can then do SSH copy ID to root at 10.20.0111, put in its password, and now if we were to just try it as the Jenkins user, we should be able to connect as root. So if we were to run this again, we shouldn't see that problem. So let's go back here, drop down on here, or rather just click there and hit build now. It's probably an easier way. And we'll see the build has been scheduled. Look, we can see here it's trying to connect via the Jenkins user. Now the problem that we're going to have with that is that the Jenkins user hasn't got rights. You don't really want to set up Jenkins on every single server. So let's go back to our job. And here we can just do --user root. Hit save and build now. Now we can see that that's running. And off it goes. So it's setting the host name, it's installing EPEL. It's then going to go and install Nginx and create us a custom index file. So there are a few extra little jobs that you need to do with Jenkins to get it working. But in a production environment, you're probably going to have keys everywhere of things that you want to connect to. And you may start using Jenkins files and things like that. So while this is going, the last thing that I want to show you is how you can then schedule your job. So you can go to configure. You can go a bit further down here and you will see build periodically. And you can set a schedule. And this schedule is a little bit like cron. So you can do *-5.1 ****. So that's going to be here. So it tells you based on that cron exactly when it's going to do it. If you press the little thing here, it tells you exactly. And if you do a -5, it actually says, are you sure you want to do that or do you want to spread the load out? And you could use this H-5 if you wanted to. But it shows you kind of examples of cron. Or you can just go to a cron calculator. So we can hit save. And that schedule has now been set. If I do it like this, it's going to run, configure. And hit save. That's now going to run every 5 minutes. And there we have it. So that's how to set up a Jenkins job. We can see there it is. It's already running. I think because it's 10:45. And we can see that's going to go through and carry on doing that job for you. Now, the massive power that I feel that Jenkins has over something like AWX is that all I've actually done is run some bash script. The difficulty I have with AWX is I might want to run a Python script. I might want to run just a bash script and then run Ansible, or run some Terraform and then run Ansible. AWX, I'm limited to running playbooks. And that doesn't really work for me in the modern world where people are using things like Terraform. It just doesn't work. There's other steps that you may need to do before running that playbook. And it's far better to have an all-encompassing tool like Jenkins that allows you to do it. There are some features of AWX that you out the box can't do in Jenkins, but most people are just running playbooks or chaining playbooks together or something like that. So I feel that Jenkins is suitable enough to be able to run Ansible playbooks correctly, safely, and again, you get the output of exactly what's happened. So let's have a look in AWX, how to set up a job to run on, in this case, one host, but it could be a group of hosts. It's going to be a very, very simple exercise, but I'm just going to show you the process of how to do it. So we have a couple of things to do. We need an inventory, we need a project, we're going to need some credentials, and we're going to need a template. They should be the only things that we need. So from the bottom upwards, let's go through them. First of all, we're going to need an inventory. So let's go through. We're going to add an inventory. We're going to call it testing. We don't need anything else in here. Let's just go ahead and save that. So this is called testing. We're going to add one host to this testing inventory group. Let's go ahead and click add. Now, to me, this really isn't intuitive. It's asking for a name here. This name here is the DNS name that it's going to use to connect to the server. But to me, that's not very obvious. We're not doing DNS today. We're just going to do it via IP. So we'll go 10, 20, 0, 111. That is the server name. Now, I've got a playbook that I'm going to show you, and this playbook actually uses inventory-based variables. So I'm going to go here, and I'm actually going to go and set a inventory-based variable. That is server name. In this example, I'm just going to call it web.test.local. So I like to write my variables out in JSON. I just find it easier. So this is an inventory-based variable. So here we have it. We've got this server, and this server is called web.test.local. So the inventory is now complete. Let's go up to the project. So for those that have never used AWX before, the project simply is where you are downloading your source code from, really. So we're going to go ahead and create a new project. Our project is going to be called testing. We need to choose a source control type. There's many in there. We're just going to pick Git. And as you'll notice, we need a source control credentials. So even though we're going from the bottom top, we can't go from the top down because templates can't be used without a project. We can't go from the bottom up because projects can't really be used without credentials. It's all a little bit of a mess. You kind of need to do inventory, credentials, projects, templates. It's not in a very good order. I'm going to just pull in this URL here. This is a public URL that anyone can use. So you could go along and do this with me. But I do want to do the source control credentials just to show you guys how it works. So I'm just going to hit save for a minute just to get out of this screen, and we can see that that's waiting. We're now going to go to the credentials. We're going to go add. And we need two types of credentials here. We need source control credentials. Now, in this example, I'm going to be using my GitHub pat token, and that is stored there in the password. So in here, we can put GitHub pat Toby. And then we can hit on save. The other thing that we're going to need is a login. So this will be a machine credential type. Again, this is all things that you kind of need to know to use AWX, and there is a bit of a learning curve there. So I'm going to type in root password. Yes, I know we shouldn't really log in as root, but for the purpose of this example, I'm going to do that. And then we're going to go down and hit save. We can then go back to our project. We can see it's failed. It's failed because it can't authenticate. We're going to go into our source control credentials. We're going to pick this one. We're going to go select. Now we've got a few options here. The two here really are quite important. The clean and delete. So we can actually clean up our repository workspace every time this synchronizes to make sure that what we're getting is exactly what's in the repository. I actually like to do it. So we can do a clean and a delete, and we hit a save. And then if we hit sync, what we should notice is that's going to run, and that is going to be successful. And it still failed. So we can go and have a look why. Of course, I have linked directly to the YAML file, when really I should be linking to the repository. So let's go on edit. Stupidly here, I just need this bit. And you can confirm that obviously in GitHub yourself if you go along to the URL in which you need to export or clone. This is actually the one I want. Click on save. And now finally, we should see that that is successful. There we go. So literally all the project has done is cloned that repository into a workspace inside AWX. We've done our credentials. We've got our root password. We've got the GitHub password that we've just proved works. Last thing we need to do is a template. So we get all these demo ones that are always there, but we're going to go now and create a job template. Again, let's call it testing. We want it to run. You can just make it check. Let's do a run. We've got our inventory. So if we click on the little icon here, we can click testing. This is the inventory that we created a moment ago. And then the project. So that project is which repository are we going to be looking in? Again, that's that testing one. Don't worry too much about execution environment in this example. Then we've got a select playbook. So we're going to drop down here, and all this is doing is looking in that repository for anything.yaml. So we've got the backup one that I created and webserver.yaml. And then we've got credentials. There's our root password that we're going to need to use. And there's some other information. If your playbook needs any variables, you can put them in here. And then we've got things in here that if you've used Ansible playbook on the command line and played with your Ansible CFG files, you've got how many forks you can do, limits, things like that. I'm not going to worry too much about that at the moment. I'm just going to go and hit save. Again, we've got privilege escalation here. So if you are doing not using the root user and you're using a user that needs a sudo, you're going to need that privilege escalation. Let's hit on save. Then we can hit on launch. Now what this is going to do is it's going to go to a web server that I've created, and it's going to go and run a couple of things. Let me show you the playbook. Here it is. Let's open up webserver.yaml. So it's going to set the hostname. It's going to install EPEL so that we can get Nginx. It's going to install some packages, so EPEL, Nginx, and Vim. It's going to ensure Nginx has started, and then it's going to put a custom index.html file down so that we know that that file has got the hostname in it. So if we actually go to files and have a look at this Ginger template, we can see here it's using that variable again called Ansible hostname. And that's all this playbook is doing. Now, incidentally, the server that I'm about to run this on has already had this run on. So let's hit run or launch, and we can see it's running. Now, the one thing I'm not particularly impressed about the output is that sometimes you've got to wait a bit for the output. That was pretty quick. I have had to wait quite a while for the output, and not running on execution nodes, just running itself on its server. It just kind of sits there a little bit. So here we go. We can see it's gone and set the hostname. Actually, I think this server has been rebuilt, so it's very possible that all of these things, I can see the hostname has already been changed, so I think everything actually will go through and run. And we can see here it's running the playbook as we expected. So that's the simple way of running a playbook inside AWX. I say simple, this is the simplest way of running a playbook, I suppose I should say. And we've got 4 things that we need to do in order to do that. We've got projects, which is the Git repository that we were using. The inventories, which is the set of servers that we want to connect to. The credentials, which we can use machine credentials and also Git credentials to be able to check out the repository. And then the template uses the projects. You can have multiple templates. If you've got one project with multiple playbooks inside it, you can then use that template. You can have multiple templates looking at the same repository using those different ones. So as you can see, this is running and the output is here. We can see everything that's gone on, and we can see that it's been successful. So that server is now complete and up to date. So there we have it. You guys need to make up your mind whether you feel AWX is something that you still want to use. For me personally, I feel I can't anymore. I feel I need to move to other technologies. Not they're newer, in fact, some of them are older, but simply because it's just too difficult to maintain. If I put everything into AWX, and I'm not a master, I don't want to be at the moment a master at Kubernetes, I'm going to have issues in the future keeping that platform going. And that's not a position that I want to be with. So I hope that video was useful, and thanks again for watching.